Hello, this is Josh Scherrer, author of the book 2020, The Journal of a Man Faced with Humanity's Downfall. Today I'm going to read to you the conclusion of the novel, and that is the chapter January. Monday, January 11th, 2021, St. Louis, Missouri. A quick note. Blizzard conditions blew in January 2nd and dumped about 3 feet of snow over 4 days. Without road crews to remove the snow, I haven't been able to get out for several days. Today, the snow finally melted enough for me to get out and scavenge the mall a few miles away for more supplies. When I returned, there was a dirty red Jeep sitting in the driveway. I searched the perimeter. Finding no one, I cautiously went inside, gun drawn. I nearly had a heart attack when I saw Dr. Staten sitting on the couch, beaten brown duffel bag by her side. She jumped to her feet when she saw me, ran to me, and embraced me. I held her in my arms. Her hair smelled faintly of strawberries, her body soft and delicate as I caressed her skin gently. Without saying anything, she gazed into my eyes, and then we kissed passionately. She said she had 2 things for me. The first she just gave me, an antidote for the TBR DNA variant that has attached itself to my cellular structure. The second she says she will give me as soon as I finish writing. She is waiting for me now. Please forgive me, Anne. It is time for me to continue living. Tuesday, January 12th, 2021, St. Louis, Missouri. This morning, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. I didn't fall asleep until around 4, but it was pleasant to just feel the warmth of another human being next to me. When I did wake from my brief slumber, Dr. Staten, Emily, was still nestled next to me, her body rising and falling as she slept. As I stared up at the white speckled ceiling, my head resting on the soft cotton pillow, I came to the realization that I am in love with Emily. I thought I would never be able to have feelings for anyone other than Anne, and although she is still a tender memory in my heart, I actually feel happy again. If by some miracle we survive all of this, I'm going to ask Emily to marry me. It is time to try and live a normal life. I am tired of living in chaos. And if the antidote Emily gives me works, I will be able to actually feel normal again. Eventually, I nudged Emily awake, and we ate a lovely breakfast of pre-packaged oatmeal and reconstituted powdered milk. I found myself staring dreamily at her, her tousled hair resting on her shoulders as she sat in an old, oversized t-shirt she found in the closet. She smiled at me, her unspoken words saying enough. After we ate breakfast, we cleaned ourselves up and got back to business. I told her about my encounter with the bodyguard at the hotel and some of the blackout episodes I have been having lately. I also confessed I have only been sleeping for 1 or 2 hours a night. She assured me that these were all effects of the DNA bonding, and now that I have the antidote, I should slowly return to normal. As we sat in the living room, she took a few notes about all that I had experienced since I left Chicago. After bringing her up to speed, Emily rummaged through her duffel, sitting by the recliner she was sitting in, and pulled out a crumpled letter. She handed it to me. FEMA delivered this to me 2 days after you left the hospital. I guess they didn't think I was involved in your escape. I skimmed the note. In short, FEMA was declaring me a risk to national security and medical liability. The letter demanded that all information regarding my case file be turned over immediately to FEMA officials in the Department of Homeland Security, was investigating the circumstances surrounding my departure from the hospital. I looked up at Emily. They broke Jillian, she said. Shortly after you left, I went to South Bend to investigate a rumor that a doctor there had linked MDPV to the TBR outbreak. While I was gone, Homeland Security raided Northwestern. When I returned, I found Jillian, who looked pretty beat up. She was upset, to say the least. I calmed her down enough to figure out what had happened. That's when I decided to head down to find you. You need to get out of here. A lump rose in my throat. And if I don't? I asked. Emily grabbed my hands and squeezed them tightly. If you don't, Homeland Security is going to deliver you to FEMA, or worse, shoot you on sight. I remembered Emily mentioning something about Mount Weather when I was in the hospital. I asked her if that was where she thought Homeland Security would take me if captured. She shook her head. I'm not completely sure, she admitted, before continuing. Before I left, though, Jillian gave me schematics of the facility that she recalled from her days with Draper Laboratory. She said that she would occasionally have to go to Mount Weather to present her findings. Emily handed me a folded piece of notebook paper. This is all of the information she gave me about the site. Tucking the paper into my shirt pocket, I asked her about her time in South Bend. She perked up, returning to diagnostician mode. Oh yes, that's how I figured out the formula for your antidote. Really? I asked, intrigued. Yes, she continued. The doctor I found in South Bend, Sam Decker, discovered how to counteract the effects of TBR with a chemical compound known as bath salts. You might remember hearing about those during the so-called cannibal scare of a few years ago. I nodded. I remember those stories. Funny how we were so worked up about a few cases of humans attacking humans compared to what we deal with now, I reflected sadly. It has been, nearly 6 or 7 years since those news stories came out? Emily looked at me grimly, apparently recalling the horrors she had seen with her own eyes. She continued, yes, the bath salts incident began in 2012 and lasted into 2013. There were 11 reported cases over the course of 2 years of cannibalistic behavior. Out of Canada, there was a porn star who attacked and dismembered his victims. Yes, I remember that. Didn't he mail body parts to TV stations in different universities? I think so, Emily continued. Anyway, he was killed in Vancouver prison while awaiting trial. During the investigation, police found a large amount of a powdered compound called Purple Sky in the guy's home. The investigation concluded that the compound was considered a bath salt and therefore legal to purchase in the United States and Canada at the time. My memory churned, recalling news reports about bath salts. For a while, it made the news almost weekly. Wasn't there some guy who ate another man's face, too? I asked. Emily nodded. Actually, there were more than one. In Florida, New Jersey, and Louisiana, 3 different men, all of them allegedly using a synthetic drug, attacked another person, biting chunks out of their victim's face. The one that received the most media attention was the attack that occurred in Miami. Oh yeah, I remember that. It was a weird case. Weren't both men naked in that one? I think you may be right. Besides the porn actor who dismembered his victims, this one was one of the more gruesome cases because of how long the attack went on before police arrived. According to reports, the attacker chewed on the face of his victim for over 15 minutes before police officers were forced to gun him down. Let me guess, bath salts were found in his system? While I was in South Bend, I did come across the autopsy report the other doctor had dredged up. The coroner did not specifically say bath salt in the report, but the chemical compound in his system was almost a perfect match for the common bath salts being sold on the market back then. I nodded for her to continue. Emily cleared her throat. Between 2012 and 2013, there were also 7 other bodies found throughout the United States that had evidence of being consumed, at least partly, by another human being. Those cases are still unsolved to this day. Comparing police records, there were individuals in those areas arrested for being under the influence of an unknown drug, but police failed to make any connection to the other deaths. I scratched my head. So what happened? Why did the attack suddenly stop? That's the same question I had too, Emily admitted. But after searching through old legislative records, Decker found that in late 2013, Congress passed a law banning the sale and production of all bath salts containing the chemical known as MDPV, which included Purple Sky and at least 100 other variants. MDPV was blamed for all of the bizarre behaviors users of bath salts presented. With a ban in place by the end of 2014, reported attacks related to bath salts dropped off significantly. So what is the connection between bath salts and TBR? I pondered. That's what is so weird about all of this, she replied. For all intents and purposes, there should not be any connection between the two. But Decker found evidence to say otherwise. I looked at her with interest. Oh, really? I urged her to continue, raising my eyebrows. Dr. Decker had a friend who was, for a lack of a better word, a hacker. He managed to rebuild an internet connection and force himself into the Homeland Security database. He also was able to track down some of the initial reports from the major news feeds. What he found was quite surprising. Emily shifted in her chair. She brushed a lock of her hair out of her face before continuing. The first reports of the outbreak came out of major metropolitan areas: Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New York, Dallas, Indianapolis, Chicago. That isn't terribly surprising. Areas with a high population density usually exhibit signs of a pandemic before more rural areas. And, I impatiently interrupted, she frowned at my insistence that she get to the point. What's interesting is that these reports coincided with a classified in-house report on the Homeland Security server called MDPV Distribution. In the report, Homeland Security's ATF agents were posing as drug dealers in those exact same cities, and they were distributing synthetic drugs that had ingredients so secretive that they weren't even in the already classified report. There are sting operations all the time, aren't there? What does that have to do with the TBR outbreak? I asked, puzzled. That's what Decker wanted to know. So he actually went to Indy and searched for those drugs. He managed to find some that had been abandoned in a warehouse when the pandemic began. Back at his lab in South Bend, he discovered something that has to be more than coincidental. What? I wondered. The compound contained most of the same ingredients that the bath salts from 2012 and 2013 contained, with a heavy concentration of MDPV. However, he found a dormant strand of TBR. According to Decker, he said that this had been chemically neutralized and through testing discovered that the TBR would reactivate when exposed to moisture. So you think that Homeland Security laced bath salts with TBR? Why would they do that? I don't know, Emily sighed, rubbing her forehead. Decker admitted that the TBR strand found in the sample were not the same as the TBR protozoa found in the cadavers I had studied. He said he was on the verge of something big, though, like he figured out the connection between the TBR strand that caused the pandemic and the synthetic drugs he found. Well, what did he find out? Emily frowned. I'm afraid we may never know. He had given me some of his notes to study for the night while I stayed at the hotel. He told me before I left his lab for the evening that he was going to stay late to finish testing his hypothesis. She swallowed hard. When I headed back to his lab the next morning, I could see thick black smoke coming from the direction of his lab. When I got closer, I could see the charred remains of the building, a small blaze still smoldering in the pile of rubble. The place was swarming with government agents, but oddly enough, no one looked interested in putting out the fire. I didn't stop, but just drove past the lab and made my way back to the hotel. I returned to Chicago that evening. But you said he had given you some of his notes? Yes, thank God. In fact, after I returned to Chicago and made sure Jillian was going to be okay, I managed to use what materials we had left in the lab to test some of Decker's theories. I was able to create the antidote I gave you using his theory that MDPV somehow interacted with the TBR. I tested the antidote on a sample of your tissue that we had placed in a hidden vault. It was all that we had left. The antidote isolated the remaining DNA from the TBR and broke it down into inert proteins. If it works, your body should start returning to normal. I pondered at the thought of feeling pain again, having more control over my response to stimuli, and more importantly, enjoying a full night's sleep. How long does it take to work? I'm not sure. The tissue sample we had was already isolated, so it may be different in a living body. The sample was normal after 48 hours. As soon as I got the results, I headed here. We spoke a bit more about the antidote and what our next steps should be. Now that I know Homeland Security is on my trail, I convinced Emily to go south to Alabama. I told her where she could find my brother. It's too dangerous to return to Chicago. I gave her my hunting knife. She refuses to carry a gun even after all of that has happened, but she at least agreed to carry the knife. We said little before she left. She tenderly kissed my cheek before heading into her Jeep. "Be careful," she begged. I just nodded my head. Wednesday, January 14th, 2021, St. Louis, Missouri. With any luck, Emily is on her way to find my brother, Lucas, and Lindsay. I have been studying what the best plan of action would be to evade Homeland Security. I cannot go north, and if they were responsible for the fire at Dr. Decker's laboratory, as I suspect, then I should avoid heading east as well. I've been gathering supplies all day. I think my best bet is to head to Montana. At one point, my cousin was living there. If she is still alive, maybe she can provide me shelter for a while till I can figure out what to do next. My head is swimming with conspiracy theories. Why would Homeland Security put TBR in a synthetic drug? Even if they did, what were they trying to accomplish? Most importantly, why were they so desperate to find me? I'm just a middle-aged man from Owensboro who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Why do they want to capture me? To study me? To kill me? I keep coming back to one conclusion. This whole outbreak must have been a government experiment gone wrong. It's not like it is unprecedented. I remember reading a long time ago about different experiments the government had signed off on. In the 1950s, the Army detonated an atomic bomb in New Mexico and then ordered their own men to advance into the area to study how long they could secure the area before radioactive fallout forced them to evacuate. I remember other studies too. The CIA experimented with LSD and other drugs, often dosing members of the general public without their knowledge. Another 40-year study, the Tuskegee syphilis study, denied hundreds of African American men the cure for syphilis once it had been found in the 1940s. The U.S. Navy exposed sailors to deadly nerve gases during a ship readiness exercise in the 1960s. Undoubtedly, these types of illegal experiments continued past the 1960s, but have simply not become unclassified. Could it be that the TBR outbreak that has caused so much destruction is just another experiment started by the government? Their keen interest in me, especially if they think I have some sort of superpower from the side effects of this disease, certainly lends itself to that theory. My eyes have been droopy, and I cannot stop yawning. I think I'm actually tired. How long has it been since I've felt the need for sleep? The Camaro is packed and ready to go. I'm going to bed soon. I want to study Dr. Rose's notes one more time. I'll leave at sunrise tomorrow. Friday, January 15th, 2021, near Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center. I found shelter in a small cave a few miles from Mount Weather. It's only a matter of time before they find me and attempt to take me to the compound. Perhaps I should explain. Before sunrise on Thursday, I awoke to the slamming of vehicle doors. Rolling out of bed, I grabbed my .38 off the nightstand and crept to the window. Peering through the gap between two boards, I could make out at least 7 vehicles, all matte black with darkened windows. They carried no insignia, but the men prepping their weapons nearby were dressed in urban digital camouflage fatigues. The men were packing assault rifles, and at least one had a grenade launcher slung over his shoulder. Outnumbered, I had no choice but to surrender. Identifying themselves as Homeland Security, they took me into custody. I tried to explain to them that this was all a mistake, that I was just a normal guy. They did not want to hear any of it. Without saying much, we loaded into the vehicles and took off. After a few hours, I figured out we were traveling east, and once we passed Louisville, most of the convoy broke off, leaving just a lead vehicle, the vehicle I was in, and a vehicle behind us. We had been driving nearly nonstop from St. Louis to Virginia. Occasionally, the convoy would stop for gas or to change drivers. I was handcuffed to the inside of the military-spec Suburban I was riding in. Armed soldiers sat on either side of me. When they let me out to use the bathroom, they would get a handcuff extension and chain me to the stall until I was finished. After driving nearly all day, we began ascending the Appalachians. We passed a Welcome to Virginia sign, and once we were off the main road, I started to suspect where we were headed. My suspicions were confirmed when the headlights of the SUV flashed on the road sign as we turned onto a narrow mountain trail, Blue Ridge Mountain Road. Emily's notes from Jillian had indicated that this was the route to Mount Weather. I knew at that point that I had to free myself or face certain death at the hands of the government. I did not have an opportunity to escape until we were past the first guard post on the road to the main FEMA facility. According to Dr. Staten, you must travel through 3 posts before you even reach the primary installation. A few miles after the first checkpoint, though, a herd of at least 50 deer stopped the convoy in its tracks. For some reason, they refused to yield the right-of-way to the vehicles coming up the road. The first vehicle in the convoy attempted to go around, but the shoulder was too narrow. There was a rock face to the left and a steep drop to the right. Nevertheless, the first vehicle, after failing to squeeze left of the herd, reversed course and took off on the right shoulder. As it passed the herd, however, the truck's right rear tire slipped off the shoulder. The driver tried to correct, but it was too late. We watched helplessly as the truck slid off of the cliff, flipping as it crashed through the trees below. We were the second vehicle in a convoy of 3, and in a moment of panic, all of the soldiers, except for the one on my left, exited the truck. As the other 3 men ran to the side of the cliff to investigate the accident, I caught the remaining soldier off guard, slamming my head into the bridge of his nose, knocking him unconscious. I leaned toward him and managed to snatch the keys from his jacket pocket. Quickly freeing myself, I grabbed his sidearm, handcuffed him, and climbed to the driver's seat. In his rush, the driver had left the truck idling. Not giving much thought to the welfare of the deer still standing in my path, I hit the accelerator and plowed ahead. Before the soldiers knew what was happening, I had already slammed into the herd, sending a doe flying over the top of the Suburban, its hoof cracking the windshield. Frightened, the other deer took off, some running in front of me, others sliding precariously down the side of the mountain. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see the men ducking to avoid being trampled by the massive herd. It did not take long for the third truck to realize what was happening and began hot pursuit. As the truck neared, I heard the back window shatter and gunfire coming from behind me. In the rearview mirror, I could see 2 soldiers leaning out of the windows of the truck. Buckling my seatbelt, I slammed on the brakes. Not being able to slow down in time, the other truck plowed into the back of the Suburban, sending the 2 soldiers flying through the air. We skidded at least 20 feet before both vehicles came to a stop. Still having the benefit of the DNA bonding flowing through my body, I barely felt any pain as I climbed out of the truck. I glanced back at the other vehicle. The driver had collapsed against the deployed airbag, either unconscious or dead. The passenger's side door opened, and I raised the semi-automatic pistol I had swiped from the other soldier, who was still barely moving in the back of the Suburban. The soldier, his face glistening with blood in the moonlight, stumbled out and collapsed onto the ground in a heap. The soldiers had taken my journal when I was captured, I guess hoping that it might give them some insight into my condition. After rummaging quickly through the Suburban, I found my journal in the cargo area. Grabbing it, I headed off into the woods, not stopping until I found this cave. After successfully escaping those soldiers, I find myself extremely tired and sore. I haven't felt this way since I was in the hospital. I think whatever Emily gave me in St. Louis is starting to work. I feel human. It's bittersweet, as I fear my injuries are more severe than I realize, and superhuman strength would be beneficial right about now. January 16th, 2021, near Mount Weather. Last night there must have been a severe snowstorm, as now the entrance to the cave is completely blocked by a new snowpack. I have melted some of the snow to drink. I need to stay hydrated. On the plus side, the snow should slow down any attempt to discover me. Of course, the snow also means there is no escape. January 17th, 2021, near Mount Weather. Without a flashlight, there's no way for me to venture deeper into the cave. The snow is drifting. The top of the entrance is nearly free of snow, and peaks of blue sky pop through. As the DNA bonding dissipates, I'm beginning to feel the extent of my injuries. It feels like I have bruised or cracked ribs, and I think my shoulders dislocated. I grow increasingly hungry. There's only so much snow a person can eat. January 18th, 2021, near Mount Weather. As the early morning haze broke through the thinning snowpack blocking the entrance of the cave, I woke from a restless sleep to the sound of hounds howling in the delight of finding the trail of the hunted. I knew immediately who they were after. I blindly made my way into the darkness of the cavern, grasping and feeling my way deeper into the cave system. The only light I had was from the faint green glow of my watch, as the early morning sunlight had charged its luminescent face. As I retreated into the cave, I could hear shouts of men rising up over the continued howls of the hounds. Within a few minutes, the howls echoed through the cave. They were here. What I did next, I had to do. There was no surrendering. The soldiers were shooting first, asking questions second. They are all dead. 2 dogs and 3 soldiers. Halfway through the firefight, I felt a fiery pinch sear my right shoulder. It wasn't until I had gunned down the last soldier that I felt the sticky wetness of blood seeping down my right arm. I tried to bandage it the best I could, but I can't get a tight wrap on it. It continues to ooze blood, though it has slowed. If you would have asked me a year ago whether or not I could kill another human being, I would have emphatically said that I couldn't. Yet here I am, having shot countless humans unfortunate enough to be infected, and another man who wasn't, all of them trying to survive like me, just in their own way. Now here are 3 dead soldiers murdered by my own hand. I stare at their lifeless bodies. These men may have had families. They had lives outside of their uniform. I'm repulsed at what I have done, but yet I still try to rationalize it. Through all of this, I told myself I'd do what I must to survive for my children's sake. These slain men would argue otherwise. What about their survival? Is my life worth more than theirs? I remember when I met Jack Carson. One of the first things he said to me was, "What's the use of living if you have to fear every person you meet?" Looking back at my actions, I should be feared. I am a killer of men. If not for my own greedy desire to stay alive, I should have surrendered myself to fate long ago. I never wanted any of this, but now I don't know how I could go back and live the way things used to be. If by some miracle I do escape this cave, what then? Am I supposed to run forever? How am I supposed to return to my children without fear of being captured and tried as a murderer, if not of the roamers, of these men? Judging from the amount of blood I've lost, I may not have to worry about it. January 19th, 2021, cave near Mount Weather. I have lost a lot of blood. I think the wound finally clotted, but I am afraid to remove the bandage. It would have been Mom's birthday today. I wish we could all be gathered around the dining room table, wishing her well and showering her with gifts and attention, making her feel special, even if it was just for the day. Those days are over. I'm afraid. I regret taking those occasions with my family for granted. I'm not holding out hope for a rescue or even a capture at this point. My toes are black, frostbite. My fingers do not look much better. I can tell my breathing has gotten shallow. It's only a matter of time. I may have survived the outbreak, but not its consequences. The government believes me to be some sort of medical anomaly, suitable only as a test subject. Even if I could convince them otherwise, They certainly would not look past the fact that 3 soldiers are dead because of me. I might be able to escape punishment for killing the roamers, maybe, but the self-defense claim does not bode well when you are talking about being taken into custody. How stupid of me to think that I could have had a normal life, not with Emily, not on my own. Now I'm little more than a menace to society, a murderer and a fugitive. I'm just a middle-aged man from Owensboro. I just want to see my children. I just want to go home and live my life in peace. Yet I know that my life will never return to the way it once was. How could it after what I've done? God forgive me. January 20th, 2021, Cave, Mount Weather. I struggle to hold the pen as I write this. A bad night. Coughing blood. I close my eyes and I can remember the unusually warm spring day that Anne and the children left for Lake Barkley. It was a Saturday, I think, in April. Lucas begged me to go. He wanted to show me the new dinosaur exhibit at the Nature Center, at the Land Between the Lakes that had seen earlier on a class field trip. Lindsay wanted to take me to her favorite restaurant by the lakes at Grand Rivers. I was too busy, I told him, too much to do at work. Anne and I argued about it the night before. She only grumbled a quick goodbye when they left that morning. I remember the birds chirping as she backed the car out of the driveway as I waved to them. I remember seeing Lindsay and Lucas waving back, melancholy smiles on their faces. I waved at them until their car turned on Maxville Road and disappeared as it passed from view. That is my last memory of them. When I talked to Anne on the phone while they were at the lake, she asked if I wanted to speak to the kids. I asked what they were doing, and she told me that the kids were swimming in the indoor pool. Not wanting to interrupt their fun, I told Anne not to bother them. I would talk to them later. Later never came. How I miss them and pray they are safe. As I flip through the pages of this journal, I question whether I want my children to know what their father has done. I read the first entry within this tattered binder. I wanted my family, my children specifically, to know that I did not give up on them. I have failed them. I became so obsessed with staying alive, with preserving my own life, that I failed to realize my life is nothing without them. I chose the relative safety of Boonville over the danger of the journey to seek out my wife and children. I may have died on my journey to find them, but I would have died a more honorable man. I certainly wouldn't have ended up as a fugitive, freezing in this God-forsaken cave with a mortal wound, alone. If you are reading this journal after I'm gone, please protect my children from what I have written on these pages. I ask that you keep silent about the atrocities I have committed until they are old enough to understand what their father went through. All that is important now is to tell my children that I love them. I will always love them. I wish I could see them before I die. I cannot keep my hand from shaking. I am cold. That concludes the novel, 2020, The Man Faced with Humanity's Downfall. I hope you've enjoyed reading the book. If you enjoyed the book, there is a sequel, 2020, Man of Ashes, that is a continuation of the story of the pandemic. So where we leave Marlon Hartman in 2020, we have to see what happens to him and what the fate of his family is. So again, I hope you've enjoyed the book. I look forward to reading more to you in the future. Have a great day.